Good evening. This is Mae Brussel. The title of this program is World Watchers. It's program number 737, January the 20th, 1986. January the 20th, 1986 also happens to be the first annual and federal holiday commemorating the birthday of Martin Luther King. At first, I was going to do an entire hour on that subject, but I'm going to put it off until next week and let the television documentaries and the celebrations take place through this evening, through Monday night, and there's plenty of time to share my opinions and views of these matters with you. I feel very angry when I see the spectacle of repeating his words, saying what he said, and not alerting to people simultaneously, both to the dream and also to the threats that surround them today, that make it very difficult to see how that dream can be put into action. Andrew Young has been visibly memorializing this occasion. He was on the balcony with Martin Luther King when he was murdered. And just as the Central Intelligence Agency has a backup team to take care of matters because the selected person in their mind as the target enemy, such as Martin Luther King, being a communist or against the war in Vietnam or so forth. Andrew Young and Jesse Jackson, who were both on the balcony with Martin Luther King, parlayed that experience into their own politics, which to me is very questionable in the way they behave and the things they cover up. And Andrew Young was visible this week, so was Jesse Jackson with his speeches. And I think of how he broke up the Democratic Party, the election, so that Nixon, I keep confusing, and it's not difficult to do that. Ronald Reagan could be reelected. Jackson working with Louis Farrakhan, and Farrakhan receiving millions of dollars from Gaddafi. And yet Jackson is there giving his sermons and becoming the center stage along with Young, and the possibilities of what Martin Luther King wanted in terms of no war and no violence are neutralized by our total defense budget, the escalation of the Star Wars, the laser weapons, and the methods of killing that have been going on before he was born and since he was murdered have escalated to such a tremendous extent. Reverend Abernathy was not part of these celebrations. He was up in Alaska. He was a long partner of Reverend King, and he was the gentleman that came out the blacks for Reagan at the last elections. Never in this past week have they mentioned the gunning down, or I haven't heard it, the gunning down of Martin Luther King's mother. She played in that same church, played the organ, or the drowning of his brother shortly after Martin Luther King was killed by a mind-controlled zombie from Ohio who's in a prison, who isn't deprogrammed, and these same black people, whether it's Stevie Wonder, Diana Ross, and the whole gang, or the white people such as Joan Baez or Bob Dylan, these people celebrating Martin Luther King. I say Dylan because he's part of the Kennedy Center celebration. None of them want to know what James Earl Ray knows or anything about the plot and the plans to kill all blacks and all Jews in the United States. They never mention those other terrible murders, of course. Now, the House Select Committee on Assassinations worked 1976, 77 into 78, and spent $6 million to try and cover up, again, the murders of John Kennedy and Martin Luther King. But in the case of Martin Luther King, they came out with a very definite, it was a conspiracy that killed Martin. And even after this money was spent, even though the plot led to the Birch Society, to plans for James Earl Ray to go to Rhodesia, for his links to the far right wing and the Klan of the United States, he knew the Klan was offering $1 million for the life of King before he even left the Missouri prison. Nobody asked any questions, and the blacks are happy to be among the very wealthy that made it, or the poor can have the same, the Graham-Rudman bill as the poor white in America. They're equal now. They can suffer equally. And I'm very bitter that these people take so much of what Martin said and dreamt and pass over the point of how he was wiped out and don't swear to themselves that never again are these people going to be gunned down who had so much to offer, and that the present administration and the one before it and the one before it are the politicians that these people are lauding and allowing them to cover up with their assistance the very murderers who are in jail and would probably, if given some kind of immunity, be more than glad to tell you exactly how the network was set up to kill a man who had a vision, who was willing to risk his life, and these people take the fruit of the risk and don't even want to know how he's gunned down like a dog. The Klan and the Nazis, the Posse Comitatus, are united today. They have computers. They're linked to Permindex, the regular assassination team coming out of various agencies in Italy, United States, and British intelligence. People like Robert Brown, a soldier of fortune, and the Aryan nations, and the Posse, and the survivalists are getting ready to shoot blacks who resist oppression in this country, to have a revolution in this country. They see the necessity to get rid of all blacks in this country. They have the assistance of corporations such as Boeing, United Technology, Lockheed. They work with the government. They work with the military. There's a network of them throughout the United States. The network links to South America. It works directly to Germany and Canada. And this holiday gives black people a lot of hope, and their chances today are going down the hole, as are many of ours, with what is happening to this country. So Martin Luther King has been dead since 1968. What he left was the chance, if you can afford it, to eat in the same restaurant. If you can afford it, stay in the hotel. If you're able to buy a home in the neighborhood where you go to school with whites, or they had a certain amount of forced busing, which mushroomed the new private schools. But the cost of homes for the blacks is the same as anyone else, going up to $100,000 or above. The health care is the same, and private hospitals can keep them out. The health care is about $1,000 a day in the cities for hospitalization. The education is going down. It's $10,000 or more per student, and very few loans, and the blacks are getting squeezed out of that. They didn't break into any trade unions that I know of in any way. The Teamsters or the builders of Manhattan, I think there's 2 or 3 blacks in all the construction of Manhattan. The opportunities for medical school and law school, the professions, is down. The private schools, the white private schools and the Christians, is up. And the racist Christian right is everywhere to be seen, wanting to run the kind of country that encourages the fanatics that are doing the things they're doing right under the eyes of the police department in every major city of this country. I don't want to be too dismal, and I'm going to do more on Martin Luther King next week because I don't want to put too many salts into my wounds, but I really feel that it is a tragedy, this way this thing is celebrated and used for people to promote the idea that there are opportunities in this country when every black child born now, just as a white, has a debt of $8,000 on his back, and the military is spending $28 million an hour. $28 million an hour for weapons. Martin Luther King was a non-violent man. So to get up there and replay his speeches, I have a dream, I have a dream, I have a dream, $28 million an hour, and he was a pacifist. He believed in nonviolence. Now, Sunday morning on CNN, I woke up early in the morning, went back to sleep later. It was 5:30 in the morning on January the 19th. They had pictures of a banquet in Atlanta, Georgia, honoring Martin Luther King. It was the main hostess, of course, was Coretta Scott King, and it was at the Martin Luther King Foundation. Jimmy Carter was there giving a few speeches, a few words of a speech. It was on TV. I flash there and I see his face. I think of Jonestown, where over 900 blacks died, mass graves, identifications taken off of them. He's part of a church, a sometimes pastor in an all-white segregated church in Georgia. We hunt and look for Gaddafi and PLO, who have reason to be violent, and then think that Jimmy Carter killed more blacks than Gaddafi and Arafat and all of the terrorists in the Middle East put together that killed Americans or touched any of us. And he is the honored speaker in Atlanta. And then I flashed to Mark Lane, who was the attorney for Jonestown. This was all under the Carter administration, who also is the attorney for James Earl Ray, the man who killed Martin Luther King, who also represented different factions that were, in quotes, opening up the John Kennedy assassination that he's kept the lid on. And he's attorney for Willis Carto, one of the strongest Nazis, right-wingers in the United States. Going from Jimmy Carter to Jonestown and Jonestown to Lane, And in the background was a picture of that Mr. Don King, the promoter of boxing and wrestling in Madison Square Garden. But the honored guest with Mrs. King, with Mrs. Martin Luther King on Saturday evening, January the 19th, 1986, was RYOICHI SASAKAWA. If you can believe that, if you've heard my broadcast on Reverend Moon of Bohai Pak, of Henry Kissinger and Sven Kramer and their links to the Korea Gate story, RYOICHI SASAKAWA, who describes himself as the #1 Japanese war criminal who worked with the assassination teams in Japan up till the time of Pearl Harbor, murdering the politicians identical to Hitler, murdering the political people, the leaders, the early Nazi Party organization from 1919 to 1929, and over 400 political assassinations, exactly the way Martin Luther King was killed in this country, probably the #1 fascist outside of Herman Apps of the Deutsche Bank, working with the Vatican, around today with the most power. RYOICHI SASAKAWA spreads millions and millions of dollars around the world and funds Reverend Moon and Moon's activities to put in the military dictatorship again in Argentina, to overthrow the democracy in Brazil, who funds Causa, the death squads in South and Central America. So next week I'm going to do the relationship of RYOICHI SASAKAWA to world oppression, to death squads, to the people that killed Martin Luther King. And can you imagine having him as the guest of honor in Atlanta, Georgia, described as the philanthropist? Do they have to take a nickel from him? Or maybe they should go back and read the speech of Socrates before he died in the trial of Socrates and see what pollution is. The whole thing was a mockery to me, having done the work, and I feel free to criticize the way this holiday was conducted because I've done as much research on the murder of Martin Luther King as anyone in the United States, any single individual. I have all the books, all the hearings, the documents, so I can feel free to be angry and not just off the top of my head with very good reasons. But the reason I'm not going to do an hour on Martin Luther King this evening is that there's something happening in our local area that is very important, but it is not only important to Monterey County, but evidently there's another country that feels that is important to the world. And the things that I talk about usually have a national, international flavor, but now we have something in our own backyards, and it may affect you as well. Many of you have read for the past few years about the genetic experiments on plants as well as people, but I'm talking about plants, and the altering of bacteria to affect various things that you want these plants to have happen to them. Specifically in Monterey County, they want to test putting bacteria, live bacteria, on strawberry plants that have already been grown, they've been planted now, and spray them in February and March and test the bacteria for the purpose of seeing how the plants avoid being destroyed by frost. But we don't have that much cold frost, and not in February and March when they're planting it. And I have reason to believe that there are other purposes behind this. And I just want to read you one news story that came out of the San Francisco Chronicle, January the 15th, and then go to what is happening here in Monterey County that pertains to it. The article is titled, Altered Bacteria, Genetic Experiment Worries Salinas. Salinas, California, is away from Pacific Grove and Carmel Valley, where I am. It's divided by a Highway 68, which is about 12 to 15 miles. And then the Salinas Valley, there's a range of mountains there. And the Salinas Valley, actually going from up North County, they call it North County, up through Monterey County, down through King City, almost to Paso Robles, is the richest agricultural area in the entire United States because of the perfect climate. 80% of the lettuce comes from this part of the country. Almost all of the United States garlic, other imported, comes from Greece and different Italy. But there's a garlic belt up here in Gilroy, and artichokes in Castroville, and beet sugar. It's a very rich crop, and as I say, 80% of all lettuce comes from this area. The article is titled, Genetic Experiment Worries Salinas. Salinas Valley residents and public officials, long used to dealing with pesticide and weed killers, faced up to a new and unfamiliar environmental issue yesterday. They're worried about an Oakland genetic engineering company, and Oakland, California is about 125 miles from Salinas Valley, right across from San Francisco, across the bay. An Oakland genetic engineering company plans to spray a plot of strawberries with genetically altered bacteria capable of preventing frost from forming on the plants. Local environmentalists began agitating against the project months ago when officials of the Advanced Genetic Scientists, AGS, we'll give it those initials, received a permit from the United States Environmental Protection Agency to launch the experiment. Their concern was heightened early this year, or this month, when the State Department of Food and Agriculture authorized the venture in Monterey County. Faced with a growing protest movement, the Board of Supervisors moved in, named a committee of health experts headed by Walter Wong, the county's environmental health officer, to examine the problem. Mr. Wong said at the meeting, this was last week's meeting of supervisors, they're puzzled over many issues. Did the company legally need a local land use permit to conduct their tests? Do any county regulations apply? Or can anybody from any genetic firm out of here just come down here and say, this is where we're going to do it? They don't apply for it. They didn't tell anybody. One of the supervisors read it in the newspaper. He said, if the altered bacteria drift through the air, do they constitute hazardous waste or air pollution? The questions had no immediate answers, but Mr. Wong's report made one specific recommendation, that the companies find another location for their experiment, a location that's more remote from the rich Salinas farming region and one where frost is a more serious problem. Now, there's some catches here, and one of them, of course, as I say, is the question of just how much frost do we have and what is really going on. Now, this article says that there will be a full-scale hearing January 27th, which will be next Monday, and I will attend it all day from 9 in the morning through the day, and then let you know also Monday night what happened at the meeting. The public is invited to attend. Now, at the Board of Supervisors meeting this last week, they received 2 communications. One was from Jeremy Rifkin, R-I-F-K-I-N, the militant Washington environmentalist who runs a foundation called the Foundation for Economic Trends. He announced that he will sue the state of California and the Environmental Protection Agency to halt the experiment. Now, the other communication, according to the San Francisco Chronicle, came from 27 members of the West German Parliament. In quotes, our health in Germany and environment must not be sacrificed to the commercial interests who are so eager to bring their new living engineered product to the marketplace, said the telegram from the German Bundestag members, 27 members of the Bundestag, to the Monterey County supervisors. Now, this article says the experiment is based on research of a Berkeley team headed by Dr. Stephen Lindau, a UC plant pathologist. Various strains of Pseudomonas bacteria normally act in nature as nucleating agents to turn fog and rain into frost when the temperatures are low. Now he and his colleagues have altered the genes of the bacteria so they no longer serve for ice formation, and the Oakland company got a license to develop ice-preventing bacteria commercially. The theory is that the altered but still presumably harmless bacteria would produce swiftly around crops and crowd out the natural organisms that would promote the formation of the frost. So out of the Bundestag, out of Germany, 27 members signed this, saying that their health and environment would be sacrificed by these experiments. Now, the nature of these experiments, the actual nature of them, and one of the arguments the critics have, and I'll list as many as I have, the time remains on this broadcast, Walter Wong said that the man in charge said the committee is worried about the test site. The actual site is being kept a secret, a closely guarded secret. Even though Wong is county environmental health officer, he isn't going to be told where the experiment will be held. No site in North County would be appropriate, he said. The Environmental Protection Agency permit stipulates that the test would be in an isolated area. North County is no longer isolated. There are 30,000 people in the area. They are talking about spraying the stuff in Castroville, where there's a concentrated area of 6,000 people, and that also supplies almost all the artichokes for the entire United States. One of the main bacteria would be altered is called Pseudomonas fluorescens, and the newspaper went on to say, another article, this bacteria might be marginally pathogenic to individuals in poor health or with weak immune systems, and I'm wondering if the spraying of this genetic bacteria has anything to do with those people who have already shown a tendency towards AIDS, but it would wipe them out, it would affect them, because one of the controversial words in this is that it could affect your immune system if you are weak. The Monterey Herald has another story that goes on. The Pseudomonas fluorescens is a marginal pathogenic bacteria that under special conditions can develop infection in cancer patients or other sick individuals. And I think of RYOICHI SASAKAWA, who's putting 50 or 60 million into South Africa in an area that is concentrated with not only starvation, but the threat of AIDS wiping out those people. And with RYOICHI SASAKAWA's war criminal record, I wonder what he's doing in South Africa and why the German Bundestag is concerned about this. Now, the immune system is important, and there are other arguments that I'll share with you, and I want to give you the background of some of the people also, again, who are doing this. Now, the hearing will be January 27th. For those of you who get this broadcast live on the air or receive tapes in the mail, it'll be at the Salinas Community Center, called the Salinas City Hall, and ask the location of the center. And you can, if you want to go down, there will be an all-day hearing. I'll be there around 8 in the morning, and I'm going to have handbills of the past record of the Environmental Protection Agency and what they have done trying to test cancer and thyroid on people's food before, and ask just what this is. The input is for the public, for state legislatures, for public officials, representatives of other counties, for the United States Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Food and Agriculture. These people will be there, and the plans are to start the experiments February 15th or March the 1st. The location is within 1/2 mile of homes. Now, the permit conditions were these. All treated crops must be destroyed or used for research purposes. They're planning to use blowtorches to destroy the area and the crops and bury them underground after or while they're doing part of the experiment. It is so dangerous that it will be blowtorched and buried. All have to be destroyed. If it was so harmless and proven to be harmless, everything wouldn't have had to be destroyed. So they're putting live bacteria in an agricultural area such as this. The second term of the permit conditions is that the Environmental Protection Agency and nearby property owners must be notified at least 15 days before spraying begins. Nobody has been notified yet, and the location is secret, or if they have been notified, it's on the condition they don't talk, because if they were in the press, then we'd know where it's going to be sprayed, and that is the last thing they want. 3, air samples must be taken during the test to measure the extent of the bacteria above the test plot. 4, the test must be carried out only while an authorized EPA observer is there. 5, after the actual 45-day field test, the EPA permit requires monitoring continuously up to 1 year. And again, I'm wondering what the Bundestag in Germany is worrying about their environment, and they're going to have a record for 1 year, but will they tell us it went wrong if they approved of it in the first place? 6, after the tests are completed, the plants in the area, as I said before, will be destroyed with propane's torch, and all remaining plant debris will be disked into the soil. 7, the permit from the Environmental Protection Agency and State Department of Agriculture allowed the experiments to be conducted privately. Nobody can be there. Mr. Wong, the county's environmental health officer, and if it is so safe, why can't the officials, the supervisors, the county health people, no one from the Monterey County, only the laboratory can do it? And it reminds me of the correspondence of Ed Meese and Caspar Weinberger and Ronald Reagan when they were running this state under HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare, and Meese is the legal advisor and Reagan is governor. And they were working with Dr. Jolly West to have secret bases that were formerly Nike bases, nuke bases in the mountains over Malibu, outside of Los Angeles, to put electrode implants and experiment on the brains of prisoners. And of course, no lay people could observe Jolly West Institute for the Study of Violent Behavior. And this is that same secrecy. All permissions were not allowed to observe except the people doing it will be done privately. And Mr. Wong said, even though we agreed to have private tests originally, now we are concerned. There's still a lot of unanswered questions. Now, the Advanced Genetic Sciences Incorporation will release these into the environment for the first time in the history of America or the world. This is happening for the very first time that an organism made in the labs, developed and genetically altered, a strain genetically altered of bacteria, they've called it Frostban, that's designed to battle frost on strawberry plants, will be put on the ground or on planet Earth. They're going to release it the first time that it's out in the open away from the laboratory. The experiment will be on a 0.2 acre plot. This will be, as I say, the first release of genetically altered bacteria that 28 members of the German parliament sent a letter or wire to the Board of Supervisors in Monterey County in Salinas, California, saying, don't do it, don't ruin our environment. Now, one Joseph Mengele, coming out of Germany, could give permission to sterilize Indians eventually in Paraguay, or to do experimentations that have been going on continuously. He took his x-rays with him to Argentina and opened up a medical supply, and obviously worked with his medical expertise there and in Paraguay and in Brazil. And goodness knows where else, Uruguay or wherever he went. But the Mengele principle, once it was out of the lab, once it was done, once you selected people to experiment on them, it went all over the world. So why did the 28 Germans not want their environment affected if it's happening in our own backyard? Now, several lawsuits have been filed to rule on the bacteria experiment, and they're all filed in Washington, D.C., so you may want to contact these people. One is the Foundation on Economic Trends in Washington. They filed a suit January 16th for an injunction to halt the genetic engineering experiment. Jeremy Rifkin, whose name I mentioned before, is part of that. There's the foundation. This foundation stopped a similar test on potatoes 2 years ago. And this also, there was supposed to be, in 1975, a similar thing to be done in Salinas Valley again, Monterey County, done by Stanford scientists. And I think of how many Project Paperclip scientists came out to Stanford University right from Peenemünde and from Nazi Germany. And there may be no relationship, but somebody in Germany knows something that's going on here and doesn't feel comfortable in Germany. And I should say that they're pretty safe from a 2-acre plot out here in Castroville, that they should be concerned about this matter. The second lawsuit is the Environmental Task Force. I don't have their telephone number or address. It's in Washington, D.C. You can look it up and get their literature, and I'll do that this week. The third is Environmental Action in Washington, D.C. Now, 5 plaintiffs have filed on this suit also. Jeremy Rifkin as an individual, Glenn Church from North County in the area, Jane and Edward Johnson from Salinas, and Jonathan Drake from Carmel Highlands. The Washington law firm of the Foundation on Economic Trends, Lee Rogers, is in charge seeking the injunction to stop that. So there are 3 lawsuits and 5 individuals who have asked that this be stopped. And attorney Edward Lee Rogers in Washington said his suit contends that the Environmental Protection Agency has not considered the danger of releasing a novel organism into the atmosphere. They did not require toxicological toxicology test to be determining the possible effect on human beings by the bacteria. In other words, they're going to release it without knowing the dangers. They didn't study the effects on human beings and plants, and he said the experiment will endanger nearby population. It could endanger the other strawberries and provide a gene pool for commercial strawberries that would be very dangerous. And this lawsuit also says there has not been adequate testing of the new bacteria known as ICE- organisms to see how harmful they are to human beings, plants, as I say, or the environment. And what if these bacteria become competitive with the natural bacteria and then dominate and take over? This is part of the lawsuit. The damage would be catastrophic and irreversible, the lawsuit states. There has to be more testing, and any experiments that release genetically engineered microbes into the environment should be conducted in remote locations away from people and away from crops. I'll take a 1-minute break and continue on with what is happening in Monterey County. This is Mae Brussel, and this is the second part of World Watchers, in case you missed the beginning or the introduction. Program number 737, to number your tapes if you're recording it off the air. And I'm talking about a company in Oakland called Advanced Genetic Sciences, and their intention to spray the fields with bacteria, living bacteria in the Monterey County, North County, up near Castroville, part of Salinas and Monterey area, and the controversies involved. And in case you missed the first part of the program, I mentioned that last week the Board of Supervisors had a meeting about this hearing, and there'll be another public hearing January 27th, next Monday, and I'll be there all day. As I say, I'll be there. It starts at 9. I'll be at the Community Center in Salinas at 8 o'clock and hand out some information about our past track record, the Environmental Protection Agency, and how little it does actually protect us in some instances. And I did mention at the first part of this program, in case you missed it, that at the last meeting, 27 members of the West German Parliament, of the German Bundestag, sent wires to the Monterey County saying our health and environment must not be sacrificed to commercial interests who are eager to bring their new living engineered products to the marketplace. Now, these may be members of the Green Party that caught on to the spraying in Monterey County, but the Green Party is there to protect the environment and to see that the world is secure from these kinds of things and to take matters into their own hands, whereas we decide that the American Medical Association or the private industry that sponsors these things knows what they're doing. And time again, we've discovered that they were experimenting on humans, setting out sprays in subways outside of San Francisco on boats that drifted into the city and caused people to die and affect their lives in many ways that they weren't even aware of. So there have to be vigilant people, and even in Germany, they are watching Monterey County, asking that this spraying be stopped. Now, Jeremy Rifkin, who I mentioned before, wrote a book on this subject called Algeny, A-L-G-E-N-Y. I didn't hear about it until this past week, and of course I'll order it, and maybe you can locate it in your library. And he says this case is a landmark for biotechnological age, the case that's going to be tested here in Monterey County this next month. He said this is an insane experiment to carry out in the richest agricultural section of California, in California. It makes no sense at all. Now, the arguments of the various critics that I listed, and I hope they're not repetitive, are the following about why they don't want this project to proceed the way it is going, and then there are some very dangerous signs from quotations of the people in charge that they do have to be investigated further. The objections are these. One that was in the lawsuit, there were several stated clearly in the lawsuit, is that there has been no testing to show that the engineered bacteria will not spread beyond the selected test plot and supplant naturally occurring bacteria that do the job. 2, it will be a high risk if it takes place because the bacteria has a small chance of going berserk, but if it does, it's uncontrollable. That is the other reason. If it if it does get out of control, it is out of the laboratory into the field and then spreads to the next field. The next argument against it is that the impact could range from increased damage to the myriad of plants of which the bacteria live to a potentially catastrophic reduction in worldwide rainfall. The P, this is the name of the bacteria, the P. syringae, Syringae, the P, capital P, dash, syringae bacteria, and the frost that they attract have been found to be an important source of particles around which the water vapor condenses to form clouds and raindrops. The question of rainfall and bacteria are questions that are not being dealt with by the men who want to push this forward. There is no guarantee regarding that subject that the bacteria will not spread beyond its designated test site, and the side effects of the frost test are unknown factors that could affect rainfall patterns, since the organism is in its natural state an important agent in cloud formation. This has been a problem, and there are few studies of frost ban. That is the name of the official operation, frost ban, that I cited before. That's like the code name of it. These studies have not been completed, and the possible impact on the crops remains. The scientific evidence also shows that the bacteria could produce a high rate of speed when it's exposed to water. It would increase itself. So the studies released at the University of Wisconsin showed that rain can stimulate reproduction of the altered bacteria at a rate of 30 to 100 over a 24-hour period. So if it's put down there and the rain falls, the bacteria increases. Another objection, the opposition group asked that the further lab testing be done before it is put out in the open. One is that there's no testing to show that it will not spread, and the other is they should test it more in the labs before they put it out in the fields. Richard Nutter, one of the critics of this operation, said the close proximity to other properties subjects the whole project to too many unanswered questions, and not enough tests done on the environment. Locally grown crops and nearby neighborhoods have not been considered in terms of the test if it spreads to these other fields. Another objection is the unknown effect and the release it could have on the entire ecosystem besides the water. Also, the land use regulations are necessary to protect the environment. We have land use regulations which they obviously didn't consider, and the people doing this say we might have known the media would blow this out. But land use regulations protect environment, people, and neighboring properties from unknown hazards of this type in the future, and land use regulations did not apply. Next, the study goes on. The actual site of the bacteria is being closely guarded secret, which produces a problem. As I said, the county environmental health officer can't be there, and he does not know where the experiment is going to be. It's that secret. No site in the North County, he says, would be appropriate. They've designated a site, and he says, we don't want any of your sites. The North County is not isolated. As I said before, there are 30,000 people immediately around that area, and they're talking about spraying it in Castroville, where I said there were 66,000 people, but then the crops all around are important. And I mentioned the problem of the immune system and the infection that it could cause, or the danger to people with cancer or other sicknesses, and it just says other sick individuals, and I'm wondering if a person has the AIDS bacteria or the AIDS into their system but has not been diagnosed as AIDS yet, it would wipe out those people. Now, the local supervisors, several of them have had interviews in the newspapers. Mr. Petrovic said they ought to play Sorcerer's Apprentice someplace else. And others have said, don't put it anywhere. Get rid of the thing. What do we need it for? Another supervisor, Barbara Shipnuck, said this experiment is inappropriate in this county. It should be isolated away from people and away from these large crop areas, maybe where one family has raising strawberries or something like that. But that obviously isn't what they're going to do. Mark Del Piero, another supervisor, said, one of my extreme concerns is that the availability of information is nil. It's like pulling teeth to get information from the people that are doing that, And Karen Strassner-Kaufman said the county should move to protect itself from being used as a guinea pig in the future. Sam Kara said, one thing that struck me about the company, the Advanced Genetic Sciences in Oakland, it seems to have forgotten the government is of and for the people. I felt very bad. I had to find out about this in the newspapers in his own county. And Glenn Church, the son of a former supervisor, Warren Church, said there are a lot of unanswered questions about frost ban. The real question is the right of a community to protect itself. And these are give you some more quotations from the supervisors. One said, if it is a pesticide, we don't have any jurisdiction, but we have a right to know. And he said genetic engineering might and will benefit society, but it must be tested under strict circumstances and not in well-populated areas. Another said, we have something here that obviously affects not only our county, but the world. That was Supervisor Petrovic from King City, who recognizes, as the members of the German Bundestag, that it might even affect them over in Germany. And he asked, what if it spreads to neighboring fields? Will it pose a risk to people living nearby? And Monterey County supervisors made it clear that they want advanced genetic scientists to take its living bacteria away from this strawberry patch somewhere else, or maybe not anywhere at all. And that's the essence of their opinion. Does it have to be anywhere at all? And another supervisor, Barbara Shipnick, again said, I'd like to see us do whatever we can to stop this experiment or relocate it. If we can't, we should make sure we're on top of controlling it. Now, Sam Farr is an assemblyman up in Sacramento who came out with an apology for this. It's very surprising. He's the only person who is recognizably supporting or giving a chance to it. He said his committee in Sacramento investigated the future use of genetic engineering and concluded that the federal regulatory process is adequate to safeguard the public, which I seriously doubt that it's adequate to safeguard the public, given their past track record. Sam Farr said a protocol was used to determine which state agency would have jurisdiction over various genetic engineering projects. Farr blamed the local officials of the state because they did not alert the local government in Monterey County or North County in Salinas about the proposed test place. They didn't tell them about it. It was approved by the state Food and Agriculture Department, but was not told to the local people that they were going to test this living bacteria. They failed to tell anyone on a local level while they were busy making sure everything was going to be okay. Now that is Sam Farr saying they were busy. They were so busy making the safeguards that they failed to tell us they were doing it. And I think he is stretching the point too much that they are honest people. I would reverse it and say maybe they weren't sure it was going to be okay, so that's why they didn't tell the local officials. There's a big difference there. He said that word got out that the spraying would take place and all hell broke loose. And I reword the problem for Sam Farr is that all hell is breaking loose because they didn't want us to know what they were doing. He said there's a lot of information about frost ban, but nobody asked for it until now. They didn't ask for it is that they weren't told about it. Now, a while back, I read an article with you or shared with you from Newsday. It was May the 11th, 1977, and it had to do with the Environmental Protection Agency, which is the same agency there is now, with not only figures and heads of states that have changed. And it had to do that certain Mexicans were picked for cancer experiments. And I might say that the fields of the artichoke fields, the lettuce, and the garlic and so forth is all done by Mexican-Americans, Chicano workers working out in the fields. They had picked Mexicans for cancer experiments because the United States subjects had moratoriums, so they were going to do it in Mexico. And the Environmental Protection Agency, this is in 1975, the same year that they wanted to do it in Salinas and Monterey County on potato crops, the men from Stanford University, they were going to use a hospital and locations in Mexico and United States taxes to pay $100,000. It was approved, and then attorney Jeffrey Howard got word of this and stopped the plan and called it inhumane and shocking So at the last minute, the proposal was blocked because of one man described by Bob Wyrick in Newsday, and the Mexican officials had approved, and the test would be on thyroid, and they would give massive doses of cancer-causing fungicides to see what effect it would have on human thyroid. Now, I mention this because this is the same year they were going to do this in Monterey County. It's the same agency that approves of it now. The bacteria can affect the immune system, which is in the news, the AIDS and the possibility that homosexuals and blacks are singled out, and this would involve Mexican or Chicano farm workers or people nearby, and they were going to use chemicals known as EBDC and give them to human beings, feed them, but in this case they could put it on leaves or plants, and this project was stopped, but that was the Environmental Protection Agency, that was United States tax dollars, and it was the year that it was going to happen here in the United States, in Monterey County, in Salinas, and North County here, by scientists at Stanford University. So Sam Farr, who's well respected here, came out with this position. They were so busy making it safe that they didn't have a chance to tell you of what was going to happen while they did it. Now, that is a very poor excuse. I don't know if he realizes what he is saying or has studied it before. But the precautions of the spraying are interesting if it's going to be so safe. The problem and the way they're going to do it is very questionable about the process of the clothes, the protection, the masks, the rubber garments, the hoods, completely covered every part of their body, and then the plan to blowtorch it as they put it away, this very small section, and it was to be isolated with a wall of earth around an area that nobody but they can see or use. Oh, the test, described as a 42-day experiment that was authorized by the federal government and state government. The actual test involves a 0.2-acre plot. The strawberry plants will be surrounded by 49-foot wide soil buffer zone in the center of a 1-acre parcel, which they don't want to reveal the location. They don't want you to know about it, as I mentioned before. They said they don't want people who are operating on it to have a lot of people watching, and they don't want to reveal their trade secrets. This is part of the condition, that they don't have a lot of watching and that they don't give their secrets. Well, a lot of watching somebody spray a strawberry patch is not revealing secrets, or the result of the spray is not revealing secrets, but they don't want a lot of people watching, and they wouldn't have had any if they had been more honest about the effects of this. Now, in order to protect the workers, the sprayers will apply the spray while wearing full protective clothing, whole-body waterproof spray suits, hats, gloves, boots, goggles, and respirators. I guess like goggles for breathing, for respiration, for their own air as they spray it. And this will be very secretive, and the excuse is that the secrets would be revealed if a supervisor saw it sprayed. Hardly. Now, the company planning this, the Advanced Genetic Sciences out of Oakland, have several people who have been quoted in the newspaper who sound a little bit dangerous. One is Trevor Suslow, Suslow, a director of research for Advanced Genetic Scientists. He says, it is safe. We have conducted extensive tests for the past 3 years. It is bacteria safe. Douglas Stephen Cull, Cull, is the agent, the representative for Monterey County who works for Advanced Genetic Scientists in Oakland. He lives in North County. He said that he's a plant pathologist. It was his decision to conduct the experiment in Monterey County. Now, that's a lot of power for a 32-year-old to say, we will use this fertile, wonderful agricultural area to do something that has never been done in the world before. He's doing it, he said, because of its proximity to Oakland headquarters, which isn't the closest place that frost comes to Oakland. And he said the local growers, 2 of them, have been working on the project with him, but we don't know who those local growers were. And I do know that 2 of the heads of the American Nazi Party, the one who calls himself the Fuhrer that I've had in the air, lives in Salinas, and he has many professions in this area. And I'm not saying they're linked to those kinds of people, but there's no proof that they're not. we haven't investigated 2 out of how many growers have approved. Mr. Cull said 98% of our effort will be in the monitoring of the activity of the imposed strain, not in checking the frost damage. So there's a little contradiction. On the one hand, they say the purpose of the test is to determine the effect of the spray on protecting it from early frost. On the other hand, 98% will be monitoring it on the strain and not in checking the frost damage. And he'll be working, Mr. Cull, with a half a dozen employees, 6 people on the project. And he said, we have serious work to do. We don't want to be hecked or have tomatoes thrown at us. We're concerned about sabotage. We don't want people undermining our efforts to confine the bacteria to the test site by coming in and traipsing it around, which means that if anybody went there, it must be so highly infectious, if that's the right word to use with bacteria, that if you noseyed around, it would jump to the next yard and then maybe jump all over the mountains and valleys and into the air and affect the rain and clouds. I don't like the press accounting of Mr. Cull saying we expected controversy from the fringes, but we're surprised at the level of concern of more open-minded individuals. Like, there's always the nuts and kooks, but if you're open-minded, why would you object to the first testing happening in this area? He said, we should have anticipated the media was going to blow this up with phrases such as man-made bacteria. Given the nature of the media coverage, I guess we should have anticipated trouble. I know the posse comitatus in the far right wing and those that would experiment with anything or everybody use words of disdain to the media and don't appreciate the fact he could have said, I'm sorry that we didn't tell the media what was happening and give them advance coverage so that they wouldn't be worried. He says as long as the media is doing it, they're scaring you. He did say in hindsight, as I say, given the nature of media coverage, I guess we should have anticipated the blow-up of this. He said his firm didn't employ a public relations consultant to help obtain public acceptance because having things filtered through a public relations person is not going to help us. Does he mean hiring a public relations firm, they may know what we're doing? The public relations, he says, couldn't help us. Well, it could help the people in Salinas, but it may not help him. He said, we have a communications problem, not a public relations problem. We can't compete in the headlines. It's easier to get people concerned than it is to reassure them. And as I say, I don't like those quotations of what he's saying. Cull is a plant pathologist, and he has an arrogance about, those people are putting up a fuss. Now, as I say, there's 2 bacteria that are involved for you scientists out there, the Pseudomonas syringae, I spelt that for you, and the Pseudomonas fluorescens, Fluorescens. 2 bacteria are involved. They're going to spray the altered bacteria, genetically altered, on growing plants. This is the first time it has ever been done. They are going to colonize a head of what they call wild bacteria, that's natural bacteria, and encourages frost formation. They're going to beat it to them. And these forms of the bacteria, they have the ability to produce a protein that promotes a formation of frost that damages plants that they want to reverse. And they're going to test it on strawberries and then make more food from the plant tissue because there won't be frost to destroy it. Now, the locals, as I say, are having a community meeting. You're all invited. The firm is the Advanced Genetic Scientists in Oakland, and it is a very serious problem that the local officials are now addressing themselves to. The state and federal have approved of it. The Environmental Protection Agency approved. The Department of Food and Agriculture, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, separate from the Food and Agriculture, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and the National Institute of Health. I don't trust the National Institute of Health and their relationship to the virus AIDS, not the virus, the disease of AIDS, and these people have all approved. The local level, the Agricultural Commission, Richard Nutter, the county planning director, Robert Sliman, and various people concerned with air pollution control and the supervisors are now active in this, along with the county's environmental health director, Walter Wong, and concerned citizens who will attend the meeting. There were 150 last week at the meeting. I couldn't attend, but they will be there this week. Now, just a quick reference, in 1975, the same year that the United States Department of Agriculture was going to test on thyroid and Mexicans. In this case, again, it affected people, largely the Mexicans that work in the farms and in the fields with this material. The National Academy of Science had a meeting at Asilomar in California in Pacific Grove, not far off this area. Right, go down Highway 68 and it'll take you right through and up to the connecting roads. The controversy sparked when Nobel laureate microbiologist Paul Berg and 3 Stanford colleagues produced a moratorium that would last 2 years on research using viruses and bacteria that could, if escaped from the laboratory, seriously threaten human health. And again, the target this time is people with a weak defense system, immune system. These men, according to the newspaper article on the stopping of the testing, were not part of the problem at Stanford, but I am very suspicious of a great number of Stanford scientists, and it would be interesting to know what else went on at the meeting in Asilomar, or if we could get the record of the meeting that sparked the controversy, so that one lawyer in Mexico stopped the testing that was supposed to be done in this county. And in this case, there was a conference, and they put a moratorium on it. So that is all I'll have on that subject for this week, but I will continue with it next week, along with some other matters. Now, getting back to some more of the Martin Luther King celebration, or you can't call it a celebration. Well, it is that. It's a remembrance of his life, remembrance of a great person. We live vicariously through these people, whether it's Jesus or Moses or John Kennedy or Martin Luther King or Robert Kennedy, and we think of the good deeds they did, or Mahatma Gandhi, and we think of the martyrs and the people that gave their lives so that our lives would be better. And I wonder, outside of being advanced in certain comforts and medicines or prescriptions to prolong your life, and even that is getting very questionable, what that's turned into, how much do we actually live what they said, or do we take these holidays, Abraham Lincoln, to quote these people? And we don't care how many martyrs there are. The more religious, the nicer they are, the more they are aware of what's going on in the world, the more likely they will be targets, including John Lennon as one of them. And there is no statute of limitations on the investigation of murders. This was put into the court trials, the investigation of the murder of Robert Kennedy. J. Edgar Hoover put it in the Warren Commission hearings when he was being interrogated or interviewed by Representative Gerald Ford, who went on to be president. And in the case of Martin Luther King, a man has been tried and convicted. Also with Surian in the Robert Kennedy case. But according to the court papers, there is no statute of limitations that runs out in a murder. And yet, as I say, the people, the powers that be that like Martin Luther King, that appreciate what he did, that want their children to emulate him or their families to emulate him, are really saying, if you emulate him, you'll be gunned down, and if you're gunned down, I don't care. Just remember he was there, take what he did, and he did a lot. And there were a lot of people killed, and there still are a lot of people being killed, and that's another thing that worries me. Now, on the Monterey Peninsula, there was a Martin Luther King's birthday today, a celebration, and the newspaper listed everything that was closed: the federal and court offices, the state offices, the county courts, the city offices, the public transit was regular, banks closed, post offices, everything. Then at the bottom it says trash pickup, normal schedule. Now, trash pickup are the black men in our community. I don't know where you are or how your trash is picked up. One of the marches, one of the strikes, was for unions for trash collectors, for which Martin Luther King was murdered for just at the end of his life. He was representing these people. Here are people who could have a 3-day holiday, the trash collectors, the black, predominantly black, in my community, and also down, I know 2 places where my hometown, Beverly Hills, and up here in Carmel, but in Manhattan, I see it's the same thing. The trash collectors work today, and the bankers have the day off for Martin Luther King. It is just preposterous. There's no way to express my feelings, my convoluted respect for King and my anger for the people who do such stupid things. And finally, there's just a couple of articles in the paper, both the same day, January the 12th, 1986, King's holiday evoking a dream across America. And then next to it, assassination is the best tool against terror, according to the Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres. Now, J. Edgar Hoover worked with those people. He had documents on trying to make Martin Luther King a communist. He wasn't a communist. He had documents on his anger at the Vietnam War. And he was considered a threat to the country, a threat to the Pentagon, to the policies of the United States, an enemy against the United States by trying to say we bugged him because he was a communist. And still today, that many years later, 1986, the Israelis, one of our closest allies, say the best tool against terror is assassination. Our president, our State Department agrees, our Secretary of State agrees, and then on the other side, the King holiday evoking a memory. The San Francisco Examiner, January 16th, had two articles side by side. The top story, bigotry in schools escalating, the official says. Hate crimes. They need police to teach cultural differences. Civil rights acts are being turned into local hate crimes. And down below, King's Dream takes shape. Keeping King's Dream alive, the Martin Luther King School. A black woman was sitting at her dining room table with her husband last week in Los Angeles. A bullet went through the window and shot her in the head and killed her. Just shot this woman like hunting seasons that the blacks are bragging about, and not the blacks, Aryan nations are bragging about. They take her to the Martin Luther King Hospital where she dies. We're out of time now, so I'll say more about it later and more about Martin Luther King and the problems surrounding the image versus the reality. But in the meantime, this is Mae Brussel, and I'll be back with you next week. Take care. Thanks for all the articles and the books.